Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. You know, what a very fun show we have for today. Our guest, Logan Crow, is the founder of the historic, although it's only 10 years old, but it's the Frida Cinema, that is the only non-profit art house remaining in Orange County, California. And art houses had been around galore, but did not make it past COVID, which we'll talk about. Logan Crow now is an avid and longtime film lover with an affinity for horror, cult, avant-garde, and genre cinema. He has distinguished himself as one of California's premier advocates for film and art house cinema. I'm very much looking forward to our chat. You probably don't know. I don't think the audience really does know what a huge movie fan I am, especially films that are considered a bit avant-garde. But I like any. Now, I go to the movies seriously probably once a week, maybe twice. And if I miss one week, I'll go 2 or 3 times another week. I go to a lot of film. That's why I can't wait for my discussion with Logan Crow about film and the world of what we call, and we will define, art house cinema. So with that, let's bring on our guest, Logan Crow. Welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's going to be fun. You have no idea. Before we begin, let's make one thing really clear from the start. I could talk about movies all day long.
Copy that. All right.
I just, that's without even talking cinema, just individual movies,
Sure.
That are popular. Because you know what's really fun, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, there's an image of art house cinema, that is the Coen brothers kind of films and different films. But, there are almost blockbuster films that really fit into that art house cinema genre. And we were talking about Apocalypse Now.
Sure.
Apocalypse Now was political, it was surreal, it was genre, it was not your normal film, and yet it was fabulous film. So it doesn't mean it has to be only shown in the art house cinema, but there is a certain creativity and a certain ethos that's around it. What do you think makes art house cinema over blockbuster films or really popular films today?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of a nebulous definition. It's, if you think of the word museum, they may stoke an idea, right? Stoke an idea about what a museum is. But then, when you start to look at the museums that exist, they're very disparate. Their approaches are different. The kind of art they show is different. One person's higher brow museum is another person's museum of sex, or museum of horror, or museum of death, like in Hollywood.
Guillermo del Toro.
Exactly. And with art houses, I mean, it's for me, there's a few different elements. Number one is there are films that have had a cult built around them. What you might call cult cinema. And even that ranges because, like I was just recently having a conversation with someone where I said Star Wars is a cult film. I said, how could Star Wars be a cult film if it's one of the biggest films of all time? And I'm like, can you give me 5 quotes from that film? Oh, I can give you 30. Okay. Have you ever worn a shirt that had Star Wars on it? Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. It's a cult film. There's a community around it. It transcended the art form to become part of vocabulary, part of clothes, part of collections, part of satire. You can't escape Star Wars spoofs.
The number of population, the high population that has seen each movie several times.
Correct. Yes, repeat viewings, absolutely. And so, at the Frida, when we look at the conversation about art house, we're looking at all these different elements. So we're not just looking at a film that would be traditionally considered an art house release, let's say, that's coming out based on a certain element. We do play new releases that are micro-independent or avant-garde or visionary, but we also play classics, some of which would be readily considered an art house cult cinema film, but also, one of our guaranteed sellout events once a year is our Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's, back to back, the extended cuts of these movies. It's a 14-hour event with breaks for food. Sold out every year. People come in.
It's one day?
It's one day.
You do all of them in one
12
day?
p.m. to 2 a.m. Yeah, and people come up dressed as hobbits, dressed as wizards. We sell second breakfasts. We theme up the whole place. And again, one might say, Lord of the Rings isn't a cult film, and I'll give them the same answer. Like how, a cult has built around this, a community has built around this. You can quote it. We can probably recite a whole scene right now. This is what makes Lord of the Rings not the Golden Compass or another big budget sci-fi fantasy film that didn't kind of build a mass awareness and a culture around it. Not to knock the Golden Compass. I'm sure there's fans out there, but we look at every sort of definition of what art house cinema is. Is it, we believe it includes foreign films. It includes anime. It includes LGBT cinema. It includes new releases of micro-independent avant-garde or animated films. But it also includes classics that would readily be considered art house and cult, and that maybe wouldn't readily be considered. The Exorcist that we're playing this month. Huge cult film. Again, we can start quoting it right now. Everyone pea soup.
It was almost a blockbuster, but not.
It was a massive blockbuster.
So it wasn't almost. It was. I know Jaws was kind of the one that made the name. But
right. Yeah, Jaws is considered the launch of the summer blockbuster, as they call it. No, but The Exorcist, I think, adjusted for inflation, I want to say is still in the top 10 films of all time, which people don't talk about much, but it was a massive, can't miss this movie hit. But yeah, Jaws is considered the first summer blockbuster. Yeah.
And I want to tell our listeners that we are going toward the later part of the podcast, we're going to get deep into horror.
Excellent.
And I know that's your genre. It's not my genre, so I'm just incredibly fascinated about why it is. But, I have so many questions for you, and I wanted to get a bit into your personal history, but I'm, maybe toward later.
Sure. I can say I've watched a lot of movies.
You've watched. Tell me, what I am curious.
Okay.
What drove you? What was the inspiration for you to get into cinema as a career?
I think that, I can't obviously recall back enough to answer the question why, and no one can really answer why they like pizza and why they like strawberries, but I've always been a huge film fanatic. If you look back at my high school yearbook, it's "We'll see you in Hollywood." I mean, as far back as even before that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and
were you doing film? Were you?
I just couldn't stop watching movies when everyone else was playing. I mean, we're talking. My earliest recollection of going to see a movie was my mother taking me to see Arthur when I was 5 with Dudley Moore. Having this transportive experience where I fell in love with New York, or this idea of New York that was presented in the movie. And, and to this day, when I think of New York, I hear that Burt Bacharach music playing in my head, and sort of that marriage of the visuals and the sonic and characters and world building was something I really responded to. And so I just wanted to see every movie under the sun from very, very early on. My heroes as a young kid, I remember when E.T. came out, I was already a huge Steven Spielberg nut. And in my language about the film, I would talk about directors. I would talk about the craft of it. Because for me, I could tell it was deeper than just an entertainment factor. There was a craft around it. What really changed me was seeing Blue Velvet. My parents took me to see Blue Velvet when I was 10 years old.
No kidding.
Yes, not knowing what the movie is, but I was a fan of The Elephant Man as a young kid. I was a weird kid, but I was a fan of The Elephant Man.
Were.
And I must have been a very strange kid, but I remember, they tell the story that I really wanted to see the next David Lynch film, because I responded very emotionally and viscerally to The Elephant Man and was a fan of his Dune, which I know he is not, but I quite loved it. And so they took me without even reading into it. And it was a shift. Something happened where I suddenly became aware that film could also be non-linear, not specific to just plot and characters, an art form, that there was something to be read between the lines, that it was something that could be really challenging and loud and tonally sort of, there are moments in Blue Velvet that are just silly and Hardy Boys, and then there are moments that are just absolutely nightmarish and loud, and it was like a roller coaster. It really shook me. And so then after Blue Velvet, I wanted to see, that's where art house happened for me. I wanted to see weird movies. I wanted to see movies that weren't like the Hollywood films that I grew up on. And so I guess that just all sort of informed this life journey of whatever I do in my life, it needs to be tied to cinema and the sharing of cinema and the conversation of cinema.
Wonderful. I just want to tell you a story about young children and the power of film. My son, it's my only child, and I was 42 when he was born, so I was a little older, and we had different values of 40 than you do at 25 when you're raising a child. Right. And I took him, he was under 3 years old. This was 1994 or 1995. And it was the animation of Batman. Do you remember the animation? I mean, it is so. My son. That
would have been Mask of the Phantasm, I think, around that time.
I don't know the name of it. I just know it was a Batman animation, and it was very dark.
Yeah.
My son, now that I remember, he was 16 months, sat in my lap, jaw-struck. He paid attention to every second, and to this day, Batman is his superhero.
It's amazing.
And then also with the movie Lion King, first time we saw the movie, to tell you how it affects a kid, he was young, 5-ish, 6. You know what he did at the end of the movie? He cried. At 5 or 6, he cried, and we said, "Son, what is the problem?" He says, "It's over."
Aww. Right. No, absolutely. And, and that's what I tell parents. And this is actually before the Frida, when we used to do the zombie walk, and people would say, "Is it okay for my child to come?" And my answer is always the same thing. It depends on the child. I think, know your child. I think looking back, when people are like, "How could your parents take you to see these movies?" It's like, because they knew that I was hungry for them, because they knew that they did not warp my head, because they knew that they weren't going to terrify me or corrupt me. And if they hadn't taken me to these films, my life's journey and my career wouldn't have happened. So I'm grateful that they took me to these films. That being said, do I think every parent in America should immediately just grab their child and take them to see the next R-rated David Lynch movie about, no, of course not. Know your child. Every child is different. Some have that sort of hunger for a certain type of art form or conversation. They want to be stimulated. They have proven that they love horror, for example, and it doesn't shake their core like another child might be shook. And maybe you don't take that child to see a horror film, I don't think there's an end-all be-all answer for everything in life, And so, fortunately, my parents knew in me I was obsessed with cinema, and I wanted to see everything under the sun. And so there was very little censorship or, at the most, if someone was topless, the little hand would come up in front of my eyes. But beyond that, language, violence, and
their throats getting
cut. That's
the American
that's
deal
the
with
thing.
sex,
Yeah.
It's you
God forbid you should see someone in their beautiful God-given body. But it's perfectly okay to see
dismember them.
Every commandment under the sun being, exactly.
That's funny. And don't you think, Logan, that it has something to do not with just going to the film and leaving the film, but that there's a family. My guess is you talked about the movie. There's a family sort of dialogue going on about it, so that the child is interacting on a deeper level than just seeing the film. There's something else. What's going on in here? What does it mean?
And it's interesting you bring that up, because I think maybe that was the thing about Blue Velvet, is we didn't know how to talk about it, because it's such a subjective film. There are some films that are really Mulholland Drive. I mean, not David Lynch again, but that are really about creating an experience, right? That the audience individually needs to process on their own and find their own sort of meaning in. And, I certainly recall talking, because we still talk about that movie. It's my favorite movie, but the art form, the colors, the beauty, the acting, et cetera, but and sort of the suburban satire. But I'm sure back then we weren't talking about the sadomasochism presented in the movie or any of that because A, it's just not something you talk to your 10-year-old about. B, knowing my parents and knowing at the time, I don't even know that they were processing that sort of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
I think of my dad, it was just like, Dennis Hopper's amazing, and that's kind of where that left, where that stopped,
Yeah. One thing I think I would like to talk about here, so we can give our audience a difference in context of what we're talking about, because many people are going to be familiar with art house cinema, but not everybody is. They're used to, and this is what I wanted to ask you. What is the distinction, or maybe just the differences between art house cinema and your, as we'll talk about it later, the wave of independent cinema, but art house cinema and traditional cinema, like we find in Orange County? I know the names of the businesses: AMC, Edwards, sure. Regal. What is the difference philosophically between those two programs?
So I am a board member of the Art House Convergence, which is a nationwide sort of assembly of art houses, and they define their mission by two key elements, which I think is true of the Frida by far, and true of most of the art houses that I would consider art houses, which they are mission-driven and community-based. I'll use the Frida as an example. The community-based part, so besides playing the films that we play, we have partnered with well over 125, 150 maybe at this point, nonprofits, educational groups, cause-based groups, individual artists, curators.
Because you are a nonprofit. I didn't state that. You are a nonprofit.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit, correct. And that is core to our mission. It's not something we do as an afterthought. So, for example, this entire weekend, Friday and Saturday, is the Viet Film Fest. They hold their event at the Frida Cinema. In November, we have the Sequelens Film Festival, that's coming back, I think, for their 5th year. We have student filmmakers premiere their films there. We have had any of a number of different types of events. We partner with local businesses. There is an interest in rising up not only just community causes, but also local businesses that maybe need to get their brand out. We do our Vita book nights where we play a film that was based on a book, and they come out and sell their books and talk about their bookstore. There is a conscious and consistent interest in making sure that we're serving our community and finding collaborations. That also translates to things we do outside of the Frida Cinema. So we do the monthly downtown Santa Ana for Saturday Art Walk.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it was going to stop until you took it over.
They weren't sure what was going to happen to it because the governing body that used to program it basically stopped being a body in December of last year. And so it was up in the air about, what's going to happen to Art Walk? And we were fortunate to reach out to them and say, look, we're an arts nonprofit organization. We've participated in the Art Walk before. How can we leverage our nonprofit status and partner up to try to keep this thing, to save this thing? And the dialogue went quickly to, well, there's no way you can help in the sense of we're done. There is no partnering. We are done at the end of the year. Having said that, do you want to talk about maybe handing it over? And then that started that dialogue. And then here we are 10 months later. And that's been really, really enriching and rewarding to put on. We do free movies at the park. Tonight, as we're talking, we're doing Ghostbusters at Birch Park on our inflatable screen, completely free. We're doing a different ghost-themed movie every Thursday this month. We get involved with art shows. We are looking for avenues to also partner and support other arts initiatives throughout the community. That's number one. That's the community-based. The mission-driven part is, so just as an immediate example, most, if not all, of those what they would call first-run sort of chain cinemas, and I'm not knocking this process because, I go to those too. They work with bookers. They are looking at what are the films that are going to bring in the most money.
Right.
They are, and they're going to put it in 1 million screens, and it's a business.
It's like what I heard Bob De Niro say one time. And people were putting down making movies for money and as opposed to art film. And De Niro said, look at the definition. We call it the movie business,
right?
Not the movie art.
Absolutely.
This is a business.
And again, when I say that, I grew up on those films. I still go. I just saw. I've seen Barbie. Oppenheimer.
We talked about seeing Barbie.
It's a business.
Both liked it.
Yeah, it's a business I support. But it's a business. It's about how do we make the most money on these films? How do we leverage that? How do we sell concessions? How do we find new ways? And for us, we have from day one curated our programming from within. We take a curatorial approach to the films we play. We have meetings. We talk about, let's sort of balance this out and what else we should play and what are people from the community asking us to play. We tell audiences all the time, the more you tell us what you want to see, the more we can provide you that. And we look at two different things. We look at ticket sales. What are some genres that do well? What are some filmmakers that people seem to respond to? But also feedback. We get feedback all the time through social media, through emails. Do you think you guys might ever play this movie? Might you ever play that movie? We keep them on a list. Every once in a while we go back to the list, and sometimes we'll be like, hey, I noticed that somebody asked for Tremors, and somebody asked for Dune, and somebody asked for, some other movie. These all have worms in them. What if we do the Worms series, and that way we can knock out these three films.
Dune, and what was the first one?
Tremors. Yeah.
Tremors. That was the first time we had just gotten bass speakers for the first time, and we put them at the edge of the couch. My son and I, we were watching, and this was years ago. We turned them up, and the couch rumbled, and we said, "This is amazing." The whole experience.
That reminds me, my first experience with a home theatrical sound system was Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And that was Laserdisc. So we're going way back. And when the Terminator steps on the skull at the very beginning, the whole house shook. And I'm like, oh my God, it was just, it's wonderful.
You know what you're doing here, and I'm we had talked before, but I'm getting a better feeling of it. I think one of the big distinctions, and please correct me anytime I'm just going off the cuff here, and these are just my impressions, is that you really are indeed a community theater.
Absolutely.
And that you use this word that I liked a lot, and that you have genre communities. There are genres that you listed, the communities are attached. And before I even get into, because I want to talk about the ones that you mentioned to me, before I even get into that, I think the very name of your art house is a genre community.
Thank you.
I think the very fact that you call it Frida, from Frida Kahlo, the great artist and wife of Diego Rivera, and that she is Hispanic, and you're in a Hispanic community. So you have a name, a Hispanic. So it's just, you right away, just by your name, say, we're identifying with our community.
Sure.
We're in Santa Ana.
And there's a reason why in our mission statement, the word is not, it's enriching, connecting, and educating communities through the art of cinema. We talked about our mission statement with intent, and I didn't want to just say the Santa Ana community or a specific, I said it's communities, because along with the Santa Ana community, there is the student community, there is the Orange County community, and then there are the communities that build around the art form of film. People that love horror films, people that love anime films. There are a number of communities we exist for.
Yeah,
people who love the Frida. That's a community.
I'll list the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that you gave me. That there is horror film, which we're going to spend the last half of the show on horror.
Okay.
I can't wait because that's a shock to me.
Sure.
Experimental film, anime, LGBTQ+. That we have that community, and then your rock docs.
Yeah.
That are very community oriented, and like I saw Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. I'd never seen that on the big screen, and that's another thing I want to talk about is the big screen.
Yes.
And then you're just doing Stop Making Sense right now with David Byrne and the Talking Heads.
Yes.
Which is just an outstanding film, but it is so different watching it on streaming on TV or some old TV TBS movie. You're seeing it the way it was intended to be shown. Amen.
And that goes back, I think, to something you said earlier, and then something we're talking about now, which is the mission part, the mission-driven part. You mentioned earlier You go to movies once, twice a week. That pastime is in peril. Streaming and the way that new generations are just used to watching the films on their phones and on their TVs home is it's revolutionary from the way we used to take in movies the first time we'd see them, which is we'd get together, we'd all go as a group, we'd go to a space sharing with other people, and we would immerse ourselves in the film. Giant screen, sound system, no opportunities to go answer the phone or pause or go get, you had to take in the art form as it was intended. And maintaining that, sustaining that is a huge part of our mission. Second to that, it's giving people an opportunity. If you did not get to see Don't Look Now on the big screen when it came out, you can still have an opportunity to go experience that at the Frida and watch it the way it was watched when it first came out, where you just can't escape this experience. You're immersed in it. You're immersed in the art form. As well as, if you are the biggest Don't Look Now fan in the world, but you never got to see it on the big screen, here's your chance. So all of those things play into mission.
I think that is huge, being able to see it on the big screen. When I was in Portland, I was in school in Portland in the early 80s, and they had an art film, an art house there, that all they showed were classic films. Sure. And, and I got to see all the Hitchcock films, all the so many different films I got to see on the big screen. It was it was so different. It was the way they were supposed to be shown. I have so much to do, and my producer is telling me he thinks we need a break, which
first half, second half.
Yeah, there's going to be a third half on this.
That's fine.
So we're going to take a break right now, and then we're going to come back, and I'll figure out where to start us.
Sounds good.
This is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. I got to tell you, this is so fun for me. I almost want to tell you, be ready for a long drive. Because I love talking about movies, and I have a very, very, very special guest, Logan Crow, who is the executive director, curator, founder of the Frida Cinema in Santa Ana, Orange County, which is we will talk a little bit more about, I think, about it. It's the last art house cinema in Orange County that is community-driven and wants to show films. I like this. This is what you put, and tell me about this, too, that I read this, that the kind of films you make are artistic, that you don't make, that you show.
Sure.
That are artistic, surreal, and often political, but they are ones that give people an opportunity or challenge people to think without easy endings. Is that you go home and you ponder. It's not just, wasn't that fun, now let's have a beer. It was, let's go have dinner and let's talk about, it's like a play. Let's go have dinner and talk about what we just saw. What was that?
Right, and really quickly, just because I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, you mentioned curator. I think you said curator earlier. I want to give a shout out to Trevor Dillon, who's actually our programmer. He's our film programmer.
Okay.
He's incredible. He does a great job. But no, it's true. Especially that's not true certainly of every film we play and every classic. But when we're looking at new screeners, because we get a lot of screener links quite often, will you consider this film? Will you consider that film? And that's always an element that I'm kind of looking for, is films that are evocative, that challenge thought, that would be the kind of films, because this happens all the time at the Frida, that as people exit, they start talking about immediately, and quite often, it's one of my favorite things to see at the theater, people who don't know each other will overhear each other and then jump into that conversation, and suddenly a new community is formed and people are meeting each other at the Frida. I love hearing about friendships that have formed at the Frida, relationships that have formed at the Frida. And most of those come from an eagerness to talk about the art whatever it was that they just saw. And what was your take on this ending? And do you think that this happened? And what was this really about? I felt like they were addressing this. Well, maybe it was more nebulous than that, or maybe it's more general. No, it was really about this, and the fire with which people get Mulholland Drive every time we play it. Very, very big dialogue in the lobby from people that will swear up and down, no, this is what this was. And people that, well, yeah, kind of, but really this. And that's something I love, is that engagement that happens both, on a one-on-one experience between the audience member and the film as they were watching the film. And then the engagement that happens after as they're dissecting it with other people, whether it's in their group or people that they are overhearing. I know that our volunteers, our staff, they're all film people as well. They love it. And they often talk about just what a fun time they have just sitting back and listening to the audience just go.
Fun.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about a film that you're showing right now, Cassandro, and it's for the LGBTQ plus. There's getting too many acronyms for me to follow there.
That's all right.
But that it's about a gay wrestler from Mexico that wants to be the Liberace of the Luche.
The luchadores, yeah. So, and it's interesting with Cassandra. So there's an event that happens quite often in Los Angeles called Lucha Vavoom, and it's a sort of hybrid between lucha libre and burlesque.
Okay, yeah, lucha libre, that was a word that I read.
Right,
okay.
luchador. And I went I used to go quite often, but it was about 5 or 6 years ago that I went, and suddenly a wrestler starts coming out, and the crowd went insane. And it was Cassandro, and he comes out to this song, Mikuku, and he's just being so overtly and unabashedly flamboyant in his movements, in his smile.
Seriously,
and the crowd is going insane. And I was fascinated by this guy. I was with my sister, and we instantly fell in love with this person, wanted to know everything about him. And so I remember back then researching him. And there was a movement, a community of luchadores who were LGBT and or who wanted to be more flamboyant in their appearance. And it was a real success story of having to form community, having to deal with homophobia, and then finding niches, finding audiences, and then ultimately becoming integral to the lucha libre community. To where they're celebrities. And so there was a documentary about Cassandra recently, and now this is the biopic with Gael Garcia Bernal playing Cassandra.
Yeah. Gael Garcia Bernal. I mean, it's
He's
just
incredible.
like incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. He's like one of my very, 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 very favorite actors. I met him in film.
Sure.
With Diego Luna.
Right.
In the films that he did back about the coming of adolescence.
Y Tu Mama También.
Yeah, Y Tu Mama También.
Fantastic film.
Incredible film. Since Paul got us into the second half, and I want to spend some time on this, you gave me a shocking statement when we were talking, and you were talking about as your favorite genres were horror, experimental, anime, LGBTQ, rock docs, those sorts of things are the genres that you like.
Well, and certainly I do love all those genres, but it's the genres that our audiences like. It's the genre. Okay. It's our top 5 genres that the audiences come out and respond to.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you said this. I'm looking for my quote, and you said something to the effect, and I'd like you to elaborate on this. Horror is the most desired genre of all out there right now.
At the Frida, that is certainly true. Yeah.
I don't get it, Logan. I mean, now yeah. I have to admit, I saw 3 times. I could not stand the horror. It was just, I almost wanted to close my eyes. But the thesis behind the horror, sure. What they did in this movie was just so amazing.
Such
especially
a great ending.
The first movie. I mean, it's just, I don't know if they get better than that first movie.
No. Although I hear the new one's pretty good. But no, the first one, up to this new one, has always been held as the standard. But
So tell me, what is the draw? Because, I'm looking back and I was thinking, The Exorcist was the beginning of what we call horror now. But we've had horror in Frankenstein, Dracula, Psycho, all those, but they were nowhere near Exorcist. This was, as they say, on steroids. What is it about this film that makes it so? What was it even about Dracula and Frankenstein that made 1920s audience and 1930s audience stirred them up? What is going on with this macabre and fantasy?
I'll start by saying, all art is subjective. And so, or is it objective? I get those two words confused sometimes.
Subjective.
But subjective. I was right the first time. Okay.
Yeah.
All art is subjective. So I certainly am not answering this question for everybody. But I look at the analogy of roller coasters. By and large, amusement parks are investing heavily in roller coasters. Universal Islands of Adventure, for example, has just spent, so much in the new coasters and and why? When you can make a thematic ride that's more pleasant and lovely, people love to have their adrenaline fired up. I think that's one big element of horror. The Exorcist is a perfect example, and Psycho, thinking of two, that were gangbusters for box office. The Exorcist blew people's minds, and at the same time that people were saying, "Oh, but it's an offensive film, and it's sacrilegious and it's horrifying," and whether or not those things were true, it was a hugely successful film because it shook people and it gave them a ride and it gave them a visceral experience that was, that you can sometimes only get from that genre of having your heart racing. But moreover, I do believe in sort of the shared experience, that something does happen when you're surrounded by an audience that is either screaming along with you, whether it's horror, laughing along with you, whether it's comedy, that's having the thrill of the experience.
A community experience.
Yeah, which is a huge part of what I value about the cinematic experience is you are on this ride with other people. You're sharing the energy in the room. And if everyone in the room is terrified, I do believe that makes the environment even more visceral. You're screaming together. Someone's scream may scare you more than the thing that you just saw in the movie. That happens to me all the time, where someone will scream and it'll get my shoulders up, and I'll realize it wasn't the thing in the movie. It was that scream that freaked me out. I mean, it's a ride. It's a roller coaster. That is, I think, one element of it. The second element of it, and I really, this is certainly not true of every horror film, but I admire that there is a certain surrealism. There's a certain imaginativeness in horror. I mean, that's true, obviously, of every film, but, it's world building. I think of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which is a film I heavily admire. Wes Craven came up with, when you really start to think about it, it's easy to say, oh, Freddy Krueger, yeah, he's the fun killer with the claws, he. But then to stop and think about one individual came up with this idea of a teacher, I know who worked at a school, I'm pretty sure he was a teacher or a groundsman or something, who, molested children. Something in the trial caused him to be released. The parents got angry. They all got together. They burned him to death. And as a way of... What
years was that?
Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984. And as a way of exacting revenge against the parents, he is now invading the dreams of their offspring and killing them in their dreams in these imaginative ways.
Oh, this is in a movie.
A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Okay. Nightmare on Elm Street. I thought we were talking about real life here, and I thought, oh my goodness.
Oh gosh, no. Well, that's my point. It's so far from real life. That's my point. It's escapism at its greatest. It is so far removed from what can happen. And I think that, to really stop to appreciate the genius of building that concept in that world is a removal from the challenges of life, and watching a movie about something that you wrestle with, or that you've got, it's a movie about a divorce. I'm not knocking these films because I watch them too. A Marriage Story is probably one of the best films I've seen in the last 10 years. But, you may not want to see a marriage story when you're dealing with a relationship issue. You may not want to see a documentary about someone that's stuck in a cave whatever. But you can go see a horror movie and just fully escape and have a visceral experience that shakes you, that sort of releases that those hormones that get released when you are in a fight or flight, thing. The brain doesn't know the difference between reality and art. It's an old sort of thing that we know.
Right, right.
So you're going through that physiological experience that you might have in a real world situation when you are confronted with a monster without having to be confronted by a monster in real life. And you get to have that experience. I think that's a big part of it. Again, someone listening might be like, that's not why I love horror. That's totally cool. These are just two things that I always, when people ask me, why do you think horror does so well? There are two things that I think are true about horror, which is that it is an experience and it is a ride. And again, when you're watching it in an audience, it even makes it more incredible. And that there's imagination to it. Where might this go? Where might this writer have created? There's no expectation about where a horror movie might go because it's from the beginning, either supernatural or it's not based on what would generally happen. I mean, with some exception, in a day-to-day world, if it's a very imaginative sort of surreal horror film. And then the third thing is that there's communities around horror. I mean, there is no that I know of. I'm sure maybe they're out there, but big comedy cinema convention or a drama cinema convention, but you see horror cinema conventions popping up all the time. I mean,
bigger than anime, probably.
Yeah, and in the last month, and anime is another genre, absolutely, that people respond to. But in the last month alone, there was Creep IE Con in the Inland Empire. There was the Halloween anniversary event in Pasadena. And people surround. They get involved with these. They wear T-shirts. I mean, there's a community that looks for this art form and gets very excited, not just to take it in, but to be surrounded by other people who also love the genre.
I can't help but everybody knows that listens knows that I get philosophical, and I'm not going to allow. We cannot talk about this more than 4 or 5 minutes max.
Okay.
Max.
Sure.
But you mentioned to me that Blatty, the author of The Exorcist, had a completely different intention than most people. He wanted to see, and tell me if I get this correct. He wanted to portray the devil as real. That this is how evil, how real it is, and if people believe in the devil, they will have to then believe in a God that's on the other side. And his objective was to get people to believe in God by using the devil as sort of the catalyst to get there. Is that right?
Correct. The story is that William Peter Blatty. William Peter Blatty is a theologist and also a very faithful person, and basically the devil is part of the dogma that is attached to Judeo-Christian God. The idea of the devil is tied directly to he is the fallen angel in that dogma. And so in writing The Exorcist, the story of a priest who's losing his faith confronts the devil and finds the strength, to wage battle, and sacrifices himself to save this little girl. He was, his thought around that was, if I can get people so charged up that they believe in possession, that they believe in the devil, then by definition, by dogma, they have to believe that there's a God.
Do you think there's a philosophical drive to artistic horror, not just money-generating horror, but horror that's trying to do something? Is there a sort of a philosophy behind it, do you think, or is it just let's just put people on this roller coaster? It
depends on the film. I mean, there are some films that are just straight up horror films that scare you. I don't think Terrifier, which is the Terrifier series, which is really really fun horror series that people are.
But then
has a thesis to it.
But then you've got the Guillermo del Toro movies that are.
Then you've got ones
different.
That are socio-political, that are talking about sexism, that are talking about suicide, that are talking about death, that are talking about God, that are talking about fascism in Guillermo del Toro's, over with everything from Pan's Labyrinth to Pinocchio. There are themes of fascism in there. Even as far back as The Devil's Backbone. I mean, it's all there, talking about history. Vuelven, Tigers Are Not Afraid, which is an incredible Mexican horror film. There's a lot of socio-political dialogue in there. La Llorona, not the American one, but the one that came out, the Spanish language one, is very much about the history. You can't
beat Spanish and Mexican film. You just cannot beat them.
Absolutely. And that's what's interesting too, is that, people will ask, for example, I gave you those 5 genres, and people will ask, sometimes, well, where's Spanish language cinema in there? I'm like, Spanish language cinema is in these 5 genres.
Yeah.
And the example I often use is we did a film festival. We partnered with a group called Hola Mexico Film Festival a few years ago. And what they did was they take films out of Mexico that had no American distribution yet, and they would tour them around the country. It was 9 films. The one film in those 9 films that was a horror film, which was Vuelven, outgrossed the other 8 films combined. And we brought it back for an encore. So my point is, those are the genres, whatever language they're in.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the Blatty story. And
how fascinating. Okay, I want to change. We've been on horror films, and I know everybody's thinking about it. We've got our audience's attention.
Do you have a favorite horror film? I'm just curious.
Do I have a favorite?
I know that you're not a big fan, but has there been a horror film that you're like, you know what, even though this was horror, I'm deeply impressed by this movie?
I don't think it would be horror, but I would say my film was The Alien. Is that horror?
Yeah, Alien's considered the cliche is haunted house in space.
Yeah, Alien is huge.
Sci-fi horror.
You know what I want to finish with, and I want to finish. I was going to say Up, and then I took a look at the films that I've listed, and these are really not so up. So, Paul, we got just a few minutes. Don't panic. But that's the Coen brother films. Yeah. And they really do represent artistic films, and I just put a list of my favorite ones. Blood Simple is not my favorite, but the one that I loved Blood Simple, but then the movie that really turned me on to the Coen brothers was Barton Fink. Okay. The head in the box, or was it a head? Was it not a head? You don't know. But then you've got Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? With George Clooney. Fargo, how do you get better than these films? And these are the political making a statement. These are films that are surreal, they're artistic. There's no easy ending,
right.
and they are the masters. Who does not say the Coen brothers are the masters of? I don't know if you'd call it independent film, but that sort of genre of film. That is what we look forward to. That's the kind of films we see at the Frida and other, what used to be independent film houses.
Yeah, when we talked on the phone before this, I mentioned to you that, I would like to, I always say David Lynch is my favorite filmmaker, but every once in a while I find myself challenged with, it might be the Coen brothers, and I have to wrestle with that.
They've got so many. They do. Many just incredible.
But they're just incredible. And interestingly enough, I was teasing earlier what my favorite Coen brothers film is Barton Fink.
Oh, is it?
In a heartbeat.
Really?
In a heartbeat.
No kidding.
So and I will look at their, because auteurism, which is, by the way, a word that I hadn't brought up earlier, but when you were talking about Coppola, and you were trying to think of a description. I'm like, it's auteurism. He was really pouring sort of a vision in there. But, I was looking at all the Coen brothers. I'm like, what is the line? And I'm like, I don't know if they've ever said this out loud. I haven't researched them very well, but I'm like, I feel like they're all about, for a looser way of putting it, the American dream gone awry, and different parts of American history.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's a great observation.
I don't think
really
it's
does fit.
I don't think it's an accident that they've never made a film that's not based in America, except for Macbeth, which only one of them did. They've all been in America, and they all involve some sort of aspiration. I'm looking even at Ballad of Buster Scruggs, where looking for the gold during the gold mine, coming to Hollywood from New York to become part of the film industry in Barton Fink, trying to get a baby and raise a nuclear family in Raising Arizona. Looking for money, looking for the big payout in any of a number of them, Fargo, et cetera, et cetera. It's people putting their morality and their better judgment aside in the search for some sort of career or money or perceived victory or self one-upmanship. and everything falls apart for them. They're like morality tales. But the different approach. I mean, there's Barton Fink is so different than let's say, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
It's a bit different than anything.
Yeah, and A Serious Man, but there, or the folk scene in Inside Llewyn Davis, and trying to, it's, these people who are often unequipped to be part of the world they're trying to become part of, or don't quite understand it, or have their own lens on it that, is their own lens, and then running up against colorful characters who, I love their worlds they build. I love The Big Lebowski. That's a movie that has really grown on me to be in my top 5. And when I first saw it, it came out after Fargo, and Fargo was such a masterpiece. And I was excited for the next one. And I'm like, well, this was an interesting, funny bowling movie. Then I watch it again. Then I watch it again. Then I start to see the insane multiple philosophies that are in that movie. And it's, and then the lines start to really, the balance between, it's not just a funny line, there's something else going on here. Or in Fargo with the Mike Yamagita scene that, if you watch it once or twice, that's a funny scene where she sits with that guy. And then the third or fourth time you watch it, you're like, oh wait, that scene had a purpose, and it's just brilliant how they put their films together. It's, one wants to know what their parents fed them for breakfast.
There's more than 2 reasons people go to film, but in our tragic, desperate, divided, insecure days, we're looking for feel-good films.
Yeah, sure.
We need something because we certainly are not getting it from our leadership. We have no hope. So I understand why so many people wanted to go to that, but there still are those that want to learn, that are hungry and want to know more, not learn educationally, but learn about life. What's the meaning of life? What are the struggles that we go through?
Are you asking me? Well, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm saying that is what art house cinema offers. Sure. And I so applaud you for hanging in. You've got a decade. You've got a decade. Next year, you got a decade in the Frida. And I have to keep saying, there were half a dozen theaters in Orange County post or pre-COVID, and there's you. There's the Frida.
And there's still other cinemas, but as far as, theaters that are doing this sort of thing, yeah. And I want to say one thing about something you just said, that people go out to look for feel-good movies. There's also, I think people go out to look for feel different. They want to feel different. Maybe it's not a movie that makes them feel good, but it makes them feel different than they're feeling at the moment.
Brilliant insight.
And that's why I think it's not all a horror film may not be a feel-good movie, but it'll make you feel different than you were feeling when you walked in and sat down.
Yeah, and you go home and leave the lights on before you go to bed.
Right. Yeah. But I appreciate that. I appreciate your kind words. I mean, it is very much a labor of love. I'm a kid who watched Cinema Paradiso as a child and identified with the character and been like, I would love to, work in a projection room and be part of a theater. It's a dream come true for me. And it's something I pinch myself for all the time. When I tell my story, every time there's a part of me that's like, what? But that's part of the reason why I take it so seriously. This does not happen for everybody. And so it is my life is the Frida Cinema, and I have no problem with that.
Oh, thank you so much. You're a blessing. Let's tell everybody about who lives in our area. Let's tell everybody if they're not familiar with the Frida, they need to get familiar with the Frida. It's on Main Street in Santa Ana.
On 4th. So it's
4th Street.
305 East 4th Street.
And it's right in the middle, a Mexican community, which is so
Correct.
Cool because there will be rooftop bands playing as you're walking into the Frida. It's a very
lively community.
It is lively. It's a wonder, and it's a very friendly, open community.
It's a very thriving artists community and arts enthusiasts. There's so much creativity happening around downtown Santa Ana. It's such an incredibly lucky for me to be part of.
People don't know that. People don't know the art community. People in Santa Ana know, but people in Orange County don't know. The art world in Santa Ana is so strong.
Yeah, lots of galleries, lots of arts education centers. I mean, it's incredible, and to be part of that has just been such a privilege. But it's a wonderful community, downtown Santa Ana. Absolutely.
Well, Logan Crow, thank you. I can't thank you enough for being on the show. This is fun.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll have to meet up. I'll be coming to the theater more. I want to come and see Cassandra. I haven't seen that.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I don't mind saying that if you miss it while it's playing, I think it's streaming on Amazon Prime now. You know, we don't stop.
Theater.
I know, but I'm saying if you miss it, like we don't stop at, and certainly because we don't play full runs of movies. We have a wonderful relationship with our distributors where they know our model and they'll allow us to play a film for a few days because we want to keep the titles mixed, moving along. But I know it's also still playing in some theaters. But yeah, no, please do. And, and we will often open a film. See, I mean, that's a perfect example. We will want to play a film. Cassandra's a perfect example. And we'll be told, okay, we can give you the film, but just so you know, it's going to stream the same day. And depending on the film, we'll be like, that's fine. That's fine. We want to give people an opportunity to watch it on the big screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And always, and I want to encourage our audience that, your movies are free. I mean, they cost $5. I mean,
our films?
Yeah,
$12.
Oh,
general admission.
$12.
Yeah.
I know. Sometimes I paid $5, and I just
we have
I,
matinees, and we have
that's probably when I
special
go is
pricing
matinees.
things.
But I encourage when you buy some refreshments, they say, "Do you want to leave any money to the charity?" And I encourage you, leave $5 or $10. What's $5 or $10, and you're promoting. You're promoting the arts in your community. You're promoting values. You're promoting a lot in your community. So I want to encourage everybody when you buy something, add to your fees to help support.
And if there's any students listening, because you guys don't do this enough, pull out your student membership, your student card. You get a discount. We go out of our way to ask someone that might be a student. Do you have a student ID? Oh, sure. But not every volunteer thinks to do that or staff member. So students, there is a student discount. Please pull out your cards and save some money. But I appreciate that. Yeah, no, we do. There, as with all arts organizations that are venue-based, ticket sales alone will not sustain us. We really, really do rely on memberships and donations. So
you're going to have to give me the website. I'm going to put that on our links,
sure.
And you'll have to give me all that information so we can.
Thank you.
We can donate. I know my wife and I want to donate as well. Once again, thank you, Logan. You've been great.
Thank you.
I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. This is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.
Thanks so much.